Welcome to Living Fearless. I'm your host, Hedieh Mirahmadi. In our previous episodes, we've talked about how Islamist ideology forms, how it moves through political systems, and how it can come into conflict with the foundations of our American legal structure. So now we're going to bring it a little closer, because this is not just happening in Washington. It's happening where you live, in your school district, city council, and zoning board. And if you're waiting for Washington to fix this first, you are already behind. By the time something becomes national, it has already been built locally. So let me show you what that actually looks like. A school district makes a decision. It may involve a policy, a practice, or how a situation is handled. It passes often with little attention. Then it gets challenged, and that case moves into federal court. Now, a local school decision is no longer just local. It becomes part of a legal standard that can influence how similar issues are handled across the country. What started in one district becomes something much bigger. And sometimes the outcome can be positive. But most of the time, it turns into a much larger battle than it ever needed to be, like the Kennedy versus Bremerton School District case. Let's take a look.
With that breaking news, in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court has ruled that a high school football coach has the First Amendment right to pray on the field after games. Former Washington State Public School football coach Joe Kennedy had been suspended from his job in 2015 over post-game prayers on the 50-yard line that sometimes involved his players. The ruling says the school district violated the coach's free speech and free exercise rights by barring him from doing so. It's another big win for religious exercise and potentially expanding the ability of public employees to practice their faith openly on the job.
So the same thing happens at the city level. A permit decision is made for an Islamic center. It goes through zoning and hearings and voting. Then it is challenged. It becomes a civil rights case. Federal agencies step in. And now a local land use decision becomes a national legal issue. What began as a single policy becomes a framework, and that framework spreads and eventually shapes how institutions will operate more broadly. Again, not from the top down, but from the ground up. This is how our system operates. It starts small. Each event seems minor on its own, but each decision sets a precedent. Each precedent becomes a reference point. And once something becomes a reference point enough times, it becomes a new normal. And you know what? Once it's normal, it's protected. Once it's protected, it becomes very difficult to challenge. So that is the pipeline. Local, normalized, protected, expanded. Now bring that into your world. Your school board decides what your children are taught, what is emphasized, and what is avoided. So teach Islamist history, ban the Bible as religion. And this is not abstract. This is a vote, an agenda, a meeting that happens in your community. Your city council decides which Islamic centers will operate in your area, which projects move forward, and which permits are approved. Your zoning board decides what gets built, where it gets built, and under what conditions. Traffic, parking, infrastructure. These are not technical details. They shape your community long after the meeting is over. And most people, they're not even paying attention to any of it. They're busy. They trust the system. They assume someone else is watching. But guess what? The radical left and the Islamists driving the change, they're watching. They show up to those meetings. They read the agendas. They speak at the hearings. And they understand something very simple. Local systems, guess what? They're easy to influence. It is easier to shape a school board than Congress. It is easier to influence a zoning decision than a federal agency. This matters because what happens in your community doesn't stay there. It shapes education, culture, policy, and our next generation. Up next, we begin with one of the most important entry points in America today, and that's our classroom. When we come back, we're going to talk about what your kids are learning in school and what they're not learning, And honestly, you would be surprised by this information because a lot of us don't even know what's happening down the street from us, or even one state over. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So if you want to understand how Islamization enters a society, you don't start with Congress. You start with the schools, because schools are where normalization occurs. Not through law, but through exposure, repetition, and authority. Let me give you a real-world example. In California, the Byron Unified School District became the center of a federal case after 7th grade students were placed into Islamic role-playing groups assigned Muslim names and to complete activities tied to Islamic practice. Students were taught the 5 pillars of Islam, including phrases like Bismillah as part of the lesson. The case, Eklund versus Byron Union School District, went to federal court and then to the Ninth Circuit. The ruling was clear. The court determined the activities were educational, not devotional. Now that has become the legal standard. Here is another case. In New Jersey, parents challenged a middle school curriculum they believe presented Islam in a way that crossed over into advocacy. They argued the material was not neutral and it treated Islam differently from other religions. Let's roll that clip.
An issue that came up with regard to a video being shown to middle schoolers, which some are saying, and the lawsuits claim, effectively it's like an Islamic recruiting video. So I watched the video this morning. There are a couple of them. One had a whole music bed. The other was were these 2 little kid cartoon characters. And it talks about the 5 pillars of Islam. It talks about Allah being the one true God. I mean, it's pretty amazing stuff. This was not, as I understand it, in just some voluntary religion class to learn about other religions and cultures. This was the only religious instruction, and the course was required, and it's middle school. Kate Oliveri joins me now. She is the attorney suing on behalf of these moms. Kate, good morning, and welcome to New Jersey 101.5. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
So, Kate, I have to tell you, I watched the video. If it was a voluntary class saying, hey, this is what is being shown, and it was a descriptive, I don't think you'd have a case. But let me understand why you're suing, because at the end of the video, the one kid, the Muslim kid, says to the other kid, hey, why don't you come and pray with me? And it literally comes off as a recruiting video. And my understanding is there are no other context provided. There's no similar Christian video, Jewish video. This is the Buddhist, nothing. This is the only thing the Chatham schools are showing.
Folks, that challenge also failed. Again, the courts ruled the instruction was permissible. Why? Because it was framed as education, not endorsement. So that's the standard. If you call it education and it's approved, regardless of how biased the material is, and then in multiple cases, education becomes this broad standard where only affects Islam, not for Christianity. And you know what? There are other cases of how Islamic education is treated differently. Across the country, schools have participated in events like the World Hijab Day, where non-Muslim students are encouraged to wear the hijab as an act of solidarity. These programs are organized through partnerships with outside advocacy organizations that present it as cultural awareness. So let's watch.
Hi, I'm Ismahan Abderrahman. I'm from Columbia Heights. I think this is like a chance for us to help students understand and be more aware of other cultures.
My name is Rahma Mahmoud. Today we're having a World Hijab Day to teach a lot of the students at Columbia Heights what the hijab is. And I feel like there's some of the students who don't wear it, don't really know what it is. They just see it and I feel like they might have questions but maybe too shy to come up without seeming ignorant. So today is just a day where everybody can just learn what it is, get questions that might be uncomfortable to them out of the way, and just bring our community closer.
I'm Lydia Kennedy. I'm a senior at Columbia Heights High School. I guess it's World Hijab Day, so we came over to ask some questions. We were a little bit curious about the hijab questions, and I guess trying a hijab, and now I get to keep it.
But ask yourself this question: are students encouraged to wear a cross for the day? Are they asked to participate in Christian or Jewish religious simulations in the same way? The issue is not exposure, it is selective engagement. And this is where most people miss what is actually happening. These are not isolated activities, they are patterns. And when the same type of content, the same framing, and the same partnerships appear across multiple schools and multiple districts, that is no longer a coincidence. It is direction. And that direction tells you where we're going next. Up next, we're going to take a closer look at those partnerships. We will be right back. Stay with us. Hi, and welcome back. So let's take it a step further. We're going to look at the partnerships that help this influence grow. Groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations, they create the school materials and guide the educators presenting Islam in the classroom. These efforts focus on countering Islamophobia. They influence the framing, the language, and the responses to criticism. Although the term has no fixed legal definition, it significantly shapes educational actions. So here's a CARE video highlighting their approach. Roll the clip. So who else is involved in this propaganda campaign? The Muslim Students Association operates across schools and universities with hundreds of chapters nationwide, including more than 600 on U.S. campuses. These are not loose little student clubs. They are structured organizations with leadership, programming, and coordinated activity. They host speakers, organize events, and build a shared identity and worldview among the students. Let's watch this clip.
UBC itself is a city. We have about 60,000 students that are going in and out every single day. And the MSA UBC team, they are actually functioning as a top executive board that is pound for pound similar to any Muslim organization. So invest in them.
The future of the Ummah.
Kind of creepy if you ask me. You know, the public schools are government property and they're supposed to be providing equal access to all outside groups, including religious organizations. But here's where the difference becomes visible. In many cases, Islamic events and cultural programs proceed so smoothly, while we've seen repeated controversies when Christians or Jewish groups attempt to hold similar events or bring speakers or even express their views on campus. They face cancellations, protests, or even administrative pushbacks. That contrast is the problem, because consistent access creates this presence, and that presence breeds familiarity amongst the students. Familiarity shapes what students begin to see as normal. So let me be clear. This is not banning religion. I'm not talking about banning religion. The Constitution protects free exercise. The issue is whether communities understand how influence operates within those protections and how those protections become grounded in law. Because once influence is protected, it doesn't remain informal. It becomes structured, enforceable, and far more difficult to challenge. And this is where we need to understand a critical concept: lawfare. Lawfare isn't breaking the law. It's using our legal mechanisms to pressure institutions to redefine their standards and gain advantages for one group over another. In 2015, the Supreme Court ruled in the EEOC versus Abercrombie and Fitch, and they sided with a Muslim applicant who was denied employment because of her headscarf conflicting with the company's neutral appearance policy. Her case was argued on the grounds of religious discrimination because the employer should have recognized the religious significance of her headscarf. Here is her statement. Let's roll the clip.
This is a statement on behalf of Samantha Eloff that I will read. I was born and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma. When I applied for a position with Abercrombie Kids, I was a teenager who loved fashion. I had worked in 2 other retail stores and was excited to work for the Abercrombie store. No one had ever told me that I could not wear a headscarf and sell clothing. Then I learned I was not hired by Abercrombie because I wear a headscarf, which is a symbol of modesty in my Muslim faith. This was shocking to me. I am grateful to the EEOC for looking into my complaint and taking my religious discrimination case to the courts. I am not only standing up for myself, but for all people who wish to adhere to their faith while at work. Observance of my faith should not prevent me from getting a job.
The Supreme Court's decision shifted the standard nationwide. Neutral policies could now create liability if they conflict with religious practices. So a similar pattern emerged at DHL when a facility in Kentucky had 24 Muslim employees and they were fired after the supervisor reversed a flexible break time policy. Supported by CARE, the fired employees filed a lawsuit alleging discrimination. However, the dispute wasn't about denying prayer itself. The real issue was their refusal to adjust prayer time to outside of peak operational hours. So DHS faced a dilemma. Granting that specific prayer break would impose an unequal burden on the other employees required to maintain productivity. So this highlights how the accommodation request can shift from a legitimate religious practice to a demand for unequal treatment. Now, we have another notable case involving a challenge to police practices. Several plaintiffs, including the ACLU and the NYCLU, sued the New York Police Department for their surveillance program targeting Muslim communities. They alleged it was religious profiling. The legal pressure resulted in policy changes within law enforcement agencies that they had to change the scrutiny practices. So federal agencies experienced similar shifts. Between 2008 and 2016, hundreds of pages of FBI training materials referencing Islam were removed through internal administrative directives. Former DHS officer Phil Haney testified in Congress that he was ordered to delete records that linked individuals to the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, affecting the terrorism cases. So let's listen to his testimony.
I'd like to start with a visual aid. This is the Homeland Security Advisory Council Countering Violent Extremism Subcommittee Interim Report for 2016. My colleague referred to it earlier as suggesting that we should refrain from using words like Ummah or Jihad or Sharia. I would like to also show you another visual aid, and this is what is called the Words Matter memo that was published in January of 2008. And my story today is going to be what happened between these two documents, these two touchstone documents, 2008 and 2016. Between these two dates, 2008 and 2016, came what I call the first Great Purge, when I was ordered by the Department of Homeland Security headquarters to modify a euphemism, removing all linking information out of approximately 820 text subject records in our law enforcement system that almost exclusively had to do with Muslim Brotherhood Network here in the United States. I was told to remove all unauthorized references to terrorism, that I was no longer allowed to do what are called memorandums of information received, what we call MOIRs, no more text records, no more research, and no more special treatment from the agency. Fast forward to August 30, 2011, when the Tablighi Jamaat court case that I worked on was approved by the Chief Counsel of Department of Homeland Security. And this is an icon of the Tablighi Jamaat movement, one of the largest in the world. Outside of the United States, it's called the Army of Darkness. I began a TDY assignment, meaning temporary duty, at the National Targeting Center in November of 2011. Within 6 months, we had instituted 1,200 law enforcement actions on the case that we had started. But in September of 2012, what I call the second Great Purge, when the administration removed 67 linking records out of that case that had direct ties both to the San Bernardino Mosque, Darul Uloom al-Islamiyah San Bernardino, and the Islamic Center of Fort Pierce down in Florida. In other words, the network that we had worked on at NTC is tied directly to the terrorist attacks that we've seen recently.
Wow, that is pretty shocking, my friends. And stay with us because we have more to come. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the show. Let's take everything we've discussed and bring it down to where outcomes actually get decided. And that's our local government. This is where projects are approved, reshaped, or stopped. Not in Washington, my friends. So right here at the planning commissions, the zoning boards, and the city councils. Let's walk through what that looks like in the real world. In Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, a large mosque and commercial development went through a full local review process in 2025 and 2026. This was a phased project starting with a prayer facility and expanding into classrooms and additional structures. The total footprint exceeded 30,000 square feet, with hundreds of parking spaces projected. The Planning Commission recommended approval after a multi-hour hearing. But when it reached the city council, the outcome changed. Let's roll that clip.
Islamic Society of Tulsa says it plans to fight back after the Broken Arrow City Council denied its request to rezone land for a proposed mosque. Supporters say the decision was discriminatory, while city leaders argue the vote had nothing to do with religion. News Channel 8's Daniela Julio Cano joins us now with the very latest details. Daniela.
Brenna, this comes just 3 days after the Broken Arrow City Council denied the rezoning in a 4-1 decision.
To clarify, yes vote would be affirmative to deny the zoning change.
The Islamic Society of Tulsa wanted to build a multi-use Islamic center near Olive Avenue and the Creek Turnpike. The Broken Arrow Planning Commission recommended approval in early December, saying the proposal met zoning and special use requirements. But despite those recommendations, City Council voted to deny the rezoning. Supporters of the project say fear and misinformation dominated public discussion, pointing to what they describe as Islamophobic rhetoric online and during the special meeting. The Islamic Society of Tulsa says it plans to pursue legal action, including a potential challenge under the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. a federal law that prohibits discrimination in zoning discussions involving religious institutions.
I know for myself, and I'm almost positive with my counsel, we don't make our decisions based on if we're going to get sued or not.
We reached out to the city of Broken Arrow, but at this time have not received a response. However, after the January 12th special meeting, media spoke with Mayor Deborah Wimpy. She says the main reason on why the rezoning was denied had to do with the main street in front of the property.
So it had nothing to do with the property itself and all the issues that they would have to face. Tonight we weren't voting on if they could make their property workable, right? We were voting on just the rezoning as itself.
Mayor Wimpy says now that the rezoning has been denied, the Islamic Society has several options. They have the right to appeal, file a lawsuit, or sell the land. Reporting in Tulsa, Danielle Liocano, News Channel 8.
This is what happens when leadership applies enforceable standards and doesn't fold under pressure. But let's look at Duvall, Washington, where a mosque proposal went through site plan review and the city required a full traffic impact analysis. The requirement was clear, approximately 80 parking spaces. The applicant met that requirement, and because it complied, the project moved forward. Not because of support or opposition, but because it met the code. Now let's go to Bethpage, New York. A mosque expansion faced community pushback and legal pressure. The result was not denial, it was modification. Let's roll the clip.
And now we have an update on the planned expansion of a mosque on Long Island after months of contention and legal fees paid by taxpayers. Oyster Bay has agreed to scale back rebuild of a mosque. The Majid al-Biki Mosque in Bethpage previously received approval to expand, but neighbors in the area pushed back, arguing that there would be parking and traffic issues. Oyster Bay was prepared to go to court Monday to stop the expansion, but in a town council vote last night, the board approved a settlement in a 6-1 vote for a scaled-back renovation.
The solution was occupancy was reduced, parking requirements were increased, the traffic controls and safety measures were added so the project moved forward. Those changes directly affect safety and long-term impact. But here's what's often missing. Not just what is being built, but how it is structured and funded. Large-scale developments are not just land use decisions, they are financial and legal structures. So the right questions are not emotional, they're structural. Who owns and controls this land? Are there going to be outside investors? Is there foreign capital involved? Because that ownership determines the control, and citizens have the right to ask these questions. And we are already seeing this and legislative responses to it as well. In Texas, lawmakers have addressed entity-controlled residential models where individuals are not actually owning the property like they thought, but they're holding interest in an organization that controls the land. This is misleading to the purchaser who thinks he's actually buying a house. That structure influences who can live there, how the property transfers, and what rules govern the community. The issues become even more complicated if the controlling entity is a nonprofit. If a project is designated as a religious organization or a nonprofit, that affects their tax treatment, their revenue flow, the regulatory oversight. And so if there's a school involved and event centers and other commercial use, it should trigger additional scrutiny. At that point, this is no longer just a place of worship. It's a multi-use development with legal and financial obligations. And so how does all of this get enforced at the local level, if at all? In Bartlett, Tennessee, city leaders denied a mosque's special use permit in a 5-1 vote, stating the decision was not based on religion. Here is the response.
A battle over a proposed mosque in Bartlett is heading to court. The American Civil Liberties Union of Tennessee filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Bartlett Muslim Society. The group accuses the city of violating religious freedom laws. It requested a special use permit to build a new place of worship. Back in February, Bartlett leaders denied the permit in a 5-1 vote. Just after that meeting, we talked to Alderman Robert Griffin, who told us why he voted no.
In any special use permit, religion is never relevant, and that was the same case here. But it's also possible to make a bad intersection worse by adding more traffic to it. And that's what this was about.
To address traffic concerns, the society says it funded an independent study and found the mosque would not add to congestion. The president of the Bartlett Muslim Society said in a statement, "Our congregation needs more space to worship, teach our children, and host community meals and gatherings. We have tried very hard to work with the city and have responded to any and all concerns raised. Yet, we were still denied a permit." We asked the city about the lawsuit Friday. Leaders sent a statement saying they had not been notified.
A federal lawsuit has been filed in that case, and they're claiming discrimination. At this point, that case is still ongoing. In Des Plaines, Illinois, a mosque rezoning case escalated into federal court as well. Residents raised concerns about traffic, congestion, and parking, but the court focused on one issue: consistency of application in the law. The court sided with the mosque because the standards were not applied equally and were not documented correctly. The city lost and had to pay $580,000 to the mosque group and forced the city to undergo training to prevent further discrimination and to follow the religious land use standards. So when a community raises questions about a development's ownership structure, the nonprofit rules or funding sources, they can trigger scrutiny under state fraud statutes, federal noncompliance laws, and fair housing regulations. And that is a good thing. Why? Because fair housing is objective. It's a legal standard. Any system that restricts who can live, buy, or participate based on the internal rules must comply with federal law. If it does not, it becomes a legal issue, not a political one. So step back and look at the pattern. In Des Plaines, inconsistent reasoning penalized the city. In Broken Arrow, public pressure combined with disciplined decision-making led to the project's denial. So what makes the difference? Demand accountability on all levels: community impact, funding, land use requirements. But if you attack the project based on religion, the case will end up in federal court for discrimination. If it cannot meet objective standards, the city will lose. And this is so important. If the objections are emotional or ideological, it weakens the case. Courts do not evaluate feelings. They evaluate evidence. Strong cases rely on clear, data-driven questions like, what is peak attendance? Are the parking requirements consistent? Are infrastructure upgrades defined? Are future phases disclosed? Who owns and controls the entity? Is there foreign or outside funding? Does the structure comply with nonprofit law? Are the fair housing laws being followed? Communities don't lose because they lack valid concerns. They lose because those concerns are presented incorrectly. Timing is also important. Early engagement builds the record and alerts the officials that people are watching. Local government is not just a process, it is leverage, and we have to use it correctly. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to the show. So let's take some practical steps, not after the crisis, but right now. Let's walk through some of those. Step 1, stay informed. You need to check your local city or county website every week and focus on the agendas for the Planning Commission, zoning boards, and city council. You're looking for key terms like a religious facility, community center, conditional use permit, site plan approval. These signal when a project's about to begin. If you miss this stage, your influence is going to be limited later. Step 2, get the documents. Request project files early from your city or planning office. Look for the site plans, traffic studies, environmental reports, and ownership disclosures. Pay attention to who owns the property, how it is structured, and whether there is a nonprofit status involved. If the funding is unclear or layered through multiple entities, those are important issues to raise with the relevant agency. Most documents are public or accessible through a public records request. You don't need a legal background. A simple AI search can tell you exactly what documents to request. Review the documents thoroughly for potential issues. Do attendance projections match the capacity? Are the parking calculations realistic? Do traffic studies reflect peak events? Are stated uses consistent across the documents? Again, who owns and controls the property? Is there a nonprofit? And are the funding sources clearly disclosed? Step 3, engage early. Attend the Planning Commission hearings first. These shape the outcomes that are difficult to reverse. You don't have to say anything. Start by observing and learning what projects are on the agenda. But stay disciplined and consistent. Focus on measurable impacts, not just your opinions. Step 4, speak clearly and correctly. And this is the most important point. Don't discuss religion. The goal is to be seen as an informed citizen raising legitimate concerns. If you make it about Islam, you will be dismissed and you will limit your effectiveness. I know it's difficult, but trust me, cities do not want Department of Justice lawsuits for religious land use violations, even if they agree with you. When you stick to the facts, it protects your rights and theirs. Step 5, stay consistent. Apply the same standards to every project. That includes the land use, funding transparency, ownership structure, compliance. Inconsistency weakens your position and creates legal risk. Step 6, document everything. Keep records of the agendas, reports you receive, dates of attendance, and photos, or even commitments made by the developers or officials. When you notice potential violations, provide evidence of noncompliance. And this is critical, especially if you find issues of fair housing violations or even nonprofit irregularities or fraud. Step 7, form a small team. You don't want to do this alone. Assign roles to people, like who's going to attend the meetings and who's going to review documents. You want to keep your efforts consistent and sustainable. Having a team allows you to share ideas and rely on one another for support. If the idea is to have people, it is also ideal to have people with different backgrounds, like people who've served in city government or civil engineering or the law. Step 8, know the law. Understanding the law protects your community and your credibility. Your goal is not to oppose religion. We cannot ban an Islamic center because we don't want Sharia. Under the Constitution, you cannot block a project based on belief. The focus is on enforcement, ensuring developments comply with state and local law. Many projects are approved because no one demands that standard of enforcement, and this is where you step in. Step 9, engage officials early and interact respectfully with your local officials before the decisions are made so you build relationships. Officials will be much more receptive before there's a public outcry or positions are solidified. Effective engagement starts early, and you want to have decision makers on your side who will champion your cause. And step 10, think long term. Monitor approved projects closely, especially for expansions. Tracking unexpected developments allows for early intervention if conditions or agreements are violated. So let me be clear. You don't need to be loud, aggressive, or hate-filled. You want to be disciplined with precision and consistency, and that's what's going to produce results. Even if you get a proposal stopped at a council meeting because citizens are screaming about Sharia, you don't want the city to lose an expensive court case. We'll be right back to discuss more about what you could do, especially as a Christian. Welcome back to the show. We have covered a lot today. We talked about how influence starts in our communities, how it's protected, how it expands, and most importantly, what you can do about it. So let's step back and ask a critical question. How should you respond most effectively? Information alone is not going to be sufficient, and your response matters deeply. If you respond emotionally, you will lose clarity. If you respond from fear, you will lose direction. And if we respond out of anger, we will lose credibility. Our response must be grounded in steady, anchored firmly in truth. As Christians, our responses go even deeper than strategy or technique. It involves our spiritual identity. Our approach must always reflect our relationship with Christ. This means that our actions, even in the toughest situations, should mirror the humility of Christ, the patience and the grace. We aren't simply called to fight battles. We're called to embody the character of Jesus. Our strength comes not from our own wisdom, but from God's word and the Holy Spirit guiding us. Every interaction, decision, and response should reflect the transformative power of our faith. It bears witness to God's truth and love in all circumstances. And Scripture provides the perfect framework for our response. In Ephesians 4:15, we're instructed clearly, speak the truth in love. Both truth and love matter. Truth alone can be very harsh, and love alone can lead to compromise. Together, they enable us to stand firm. And now we add wisdom into that framework. Matthew 10:16. Be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. This isn't merely good advice, it's direct instruction. Wisdom means understanding the systems that you face, knowing the law, and recognizing how influence operates. Innocence ensures you never become what you oppose. You don't deceive or manipulate or operate in bad faith. Maintaining this balance is crucial. And next, courage. Joshua 1:9. It commands clearly, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And courage, it doesn't mean aggression. Real courage is steady, reliable, and calm. It consistently shows up, it speaks clearly, and never retreats when truth becomes uncomfortable. Silence doesn't preserve peace. It creates space for confusion. Your clear, consistent voice is essential right now. And so let's define our role clearly. We're not called to control others or force our beliefs upon them. We're never called to respond with hostility. Instead, we're called to stand firm for truth, protect what is right, and defend justice without ever compromising our integrity. Integrity is everything. Once we compromise that, it undermines our entire stance. Then we want to anchor our actions in the true freedom that we have. Galatians 5:1 reminds us powerfully. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. Let's understand clearly, freedom isn't just political. It is deeply spiritual. It's our ability to choose, to believe, and to speak freely without coercion. Protecting that freedom requires faithful dedication and not just emotional reactions. And now let's bring this understanding home, literally. Let's focus specifically on your AOR, your area of responsibility. That is your home, your community, the school, and the local government around you. We don't need to fix every problem everywhere. Our responsibility is to remain faithful where God has placed us. Pay close attention, stay informed, engage wisely, and never step outside the truth, trying to defend it. Truth doesn't require manipulation. It demands clarity and precision. And you know what? If you feel overwhelmed, simplify your approach. Pause to pray earnestly for discernment, wisdom, and courage. Then, take the next clear step. Not many at once, just one. This careful, steady approach sustains your efforts and keeps you grounded, enabling you to live genuinely fearless. And if you are navigating these challenges and dealing with these complex questions and not knowing where to start, please reach out to me. You don't have to face these alone. You can find me on my website, resurrectministry.com, or on Instagram at Hedieh Mirahmadi. I personally review messages, I send out training manuals, I pray over your questions, and I provide guidance as best I can. Thank you for being with us today on Living Fearless.